The letter to Philadelphia is the one that is mentioned the most as a reference among the 7 churches of the book of Revelation. Interestingly, it contains no reproach at all. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name.
Alongside Smyrna, it was the only other church not to be reprimanded by the Lord. However, he did appeal to the members to do certain things. The Lord highlights their faithfulness.
It probably is the most surprising city to receive a letter, again, because it's the least important, the least developed among the other cities. So in terms of its history, its significance, it's the least of all of these.
It didn't stand out to others. It was not one of the largest churches, but it stayed faithful.
It's a wonderful model for all the churches. Our pastors aspire to have a congregation like Philadelphia's.
In what way does this church exemplify faithfulness? What extra ingredient makes it so exemplary compared to others? "45 kilometers through a long, fertile plain separates Sardis from the site of Philadelphia. Today, the city is called Al-Shahir. It was located on the road connecting Sardis to Laodicea.
It was noted in antiquity even for the wine growing, the grape growing that was around the area, so very fertile agricultural lands then, and even today it's still noted for its grapes that produce raisins in this region.
The ground contains volcanic rock, which made the region extremely farmable, but the volcano's activity also causes frequent earthquakes.
Western Turkey is an earthquake zone, and even today we shake continuously, but we don't feel most of the time. But big earthquakes have been recorded in our history, the last one being in 1969. And I do remember that Al-Shahir was badly affected, and most of the villages were rebuilt by the government.
The residents welcome me in the typical hospitable and heartwarming way of this nation.
Philadelphia was late with the development of buildings. It probably originally was surrounded by a wall. We have few remains in the city of Al-Shahir today. The modern city is built again over the ancient city. And one of the things that all the visitors to Philadelphia see are 3 very large pillars from a Christian church called St. John's Church that commemorated the importance of Philadelphia in the book of Revelation.
These 3 massive pillars, which only give a vague idea of what this Christian basilica once was, are the last historical traces of a presence of a Christian culture that are left in Philadelphia. They are witnesses of a change in the civilization that occurred in that region in the 13th century. For nearly 1,000 years, Western Anatolia was under the control of the Byzantine Empire, which had followed the Roman Empire and had an Orthodox Christian culture. But in the 13th century, the conquest from the Turkish Muslim Beyliks, the forerunners of the Ottoman Empire, had weakened the empire and was breathing almost its last breath. By that time, the Byzantine city of Philadelphia was surrounded by enemies, but resisted greatly against the Turkish attacks, while other cities around them had surrendered to the enemy. It remained independent for nearly a century, like the bastion of Hellenism, standing firm against the Ottoman conquest. Nevertheless, the city was conquered in 1390, ahead of the fall of the great city of Constantinople in 1453, which sealed the end of the Byzantine Empire and of Christianity in Turkey. This part of the history of the city is interesting for my investigation, as it shows how brave the inhabitants in the city were, as they put up a heroic resistance in that hostile environment. This also reminds me of the perseverance of the Christians in Philadelphia, honored in the letter for their faithfulness to Christ. But it is even more unsettling to realize here in the middle of these ruins how great the symbolic value of the pillar as mentioned in the letter to Philadelphia is. For these ancient pillars standing here in the middle of the city of Al-Shahir echo particularly with the end of the letter. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. It's fascinating to consider this tangible illustration representing the promise which had been made to the Church of Philadelphia. What did this image mean for the Christians in the city? An event in the history of the city gives us a better understanding of how relevant this detail in the letter was. Indeed, a few years before the book of Revelation was written, a terrible disaster happened, which left its mark upon all who lived here.
In AD 17, there was a very strict earthquake which devastated like 12 cities in Western Turkey. And all these cities, including Sardis, were toppled down. And the Emperor Tiberius, then son of Augustus, Tiberius sent aid to these cities to rebuild them, and they were exempted from taxes for 5 years, including Philadelphia. Strabo, the ancient geographer from Amasya, again in Turkey, states that he wondered how the locals loved this spot because it was continuously shaken with earthquakes. The walls were continuously cracking and they were continuously repairing the walls.
He talks about how people had to flee the city because of earthquakes. They were afraid to go back because of the aftershocks that were there. So this was an ongoing issue with Philadelphia.
Instead of rebuilding after earthquakes, parts of the population lived in tents, an indication of uncertainty. A reference to a column indicates stability. It indicates something lasting. This speaks to the church of a situation that is no longer uncertain, but one that is stable and secure for eternity.
A pillar is indestructible, immovable. It cannot be shifted. It pictures something secure and lasting, and it is in the temple. If God places us in His house like this, as pillars, that means that nothing can shake us or remove us from there. It is a firm promise.
Obviously, for the residents of Philadelphia, this had great significance, and even more so for the church, which now knew that it rested on unshakable foundations, the foundation of Christ.
There was also an interesting tradition in Philadelphia, which consisted in engraving the names of public figures and important people of the city on the columns of some temples. This is how they would carry on the memory of those who had impacted the life of the city. The reference to this tradition in the letter is quite obvious.
This is an interesting phenomenon we see around Western Turkey in certain temples of writing names on columns. People who are the elite of the city who serve as priests in the imperial cult as also leaders in the city. And of course, the Christians are not going to get their names written in columns like this because they have an alternate kingdom. an alternate reality. And they're not aspiring for status and fame in this life. And so always throughout Revelation, we're pointing to a different reality, a different kingdom that John and Jesus are trying to get the followers of the Lamb to live in this kingdom.
The letter to the Church of Philadelphia is a tribute to their unfailing faithfulness. In this letter, Christ declares how strong, reliable, and certain the promises of God are, as opposed to the weaknesses of a city subjected to the hazards of earthquakes. Throughout centuries of civilizations, the pillars of the Basilica of St. John still remain as a symbol of that promise today. A promise beheld by all those who, encouraged through this letter, persevere and remain faithful to Christ. This church, which has little strength in human eyes, is nonetheless the one that Christ honors the most. In the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he confirms this point. God chose the weak things of this world to shame the strong. This verse is such a good illustration of the reality of the Church of Philadelphia.